The salt-laced wind, a familiar balm and a persistent sting, whipped strands of gray from my temples. I stood by the rail, the vast, bruised canvas of the sea stretching before me, indifferent. Below, the rhythmic thrum of the engine vibrated through the worn deck of the fishing boat 12 miles offshore, Transfer Point. This was my office now, a place of quiet transactions and hollow introspection, far removed from the polished precinct floors I once strode. My hands, once quick to draw a weapon or flip through case files, now merely gripped a thermos of lukewarm coffee. Life, it seemed, had a cruel sense of irony, trading one kind of deep water for another. A shadow detached itself from the cabin door. The boat's owner, a man whose face was a roadmap of weathered lines and unspoken histories, approached. He wasn't one for pleasantries, which suited me. He held out a burner phone, its screen glowing with a news alert. "Heard you still keep an ear to the ground, Cole," the owner rumbled, his voice roughened by years of shouting over engine noise. "Thought you'd want to see this." I took the device. The headline, stark and unforgiving, clawed at the fragile piece I'd constructed: gallery heist, precision and absence. My gaze dropped to the accompanying image, a gaping hole in a steel vault, clean as a surgeon's incision. The gallery mentioned was the Oakhaven, a place I knew well. Its security protocols etched into my memory from a different life. Not a tremor of fear, but of recognition. The vault door hadn't been forced, it had been opened. No alarms tripped, no cameras disabled, just a silent, surgical bypass of every failsafe, a ghost in the machine. "Anything else?" I asked, my voice flatter than I intended. The owner shrugged, a gesture that conveyed both indifference and a grudging respect for my old habits. "They say nothing was touched. Just the vault opened, then closed. Empty, of course. Empty." The word resonated with an icy clarity. My mind, long dulled by resignation, began to sharpen, each detail a painful reawakening. The perpetrator hadn't just taken the contents, they had taken the opportunity. A statement. Years ago, a different city, a different kind of theft. Not of objects, but of lives. A series of disappearances, each victim plucked from their routine without a trace, leaving behind only the unsettling absence of struggle. The crime scenes were always pristine, undisturbed, save for the missing person. We found no forced entry, no struggle, no discarded evidence. It was as if the victims had simply evaporated. The media, hungry for a narrative, had christened the phantom the collector. And I, Cole, had failed to catch him. The case had broken me, shattered my career, and left me adrift. I handed the phone back. The metal cool against my fingertips, a stark contrast to the sudden fever in my veins. "They'll be looking for a new crew," I murmured, more to myself than to the owner. He raised an eyebrow, a silent question. "A crew that can walk through walls, maybe?" "No," I countered, the word sharp, definitive. "A crew that doesn't exist. One person, maybe two, someone who knows the system better than its architects. Someone who enjoys the quiet spectacle of it all." The owner grunted, turning back towards the cabin. "Sounds like your kind of trouble, Cole." He was right. It was. I stared at the horizon where the first pale blush of dawn threatened to break the night's hold. The Oakhaven Gallery. Its security chief, a pompous man named Finch, had always boasted of his impenetrable systems, yet someone had slipped through, and the method. It was too precise, too elegant, too familiar. This heist mirrored that philosophy. It wasn't about the loot, it was about the demonstration. My initial thought was a desperate plea for normalcy, a wish that this was just a coincidence, a trick of a tired mind connecting disparate threads, the sheer audacity of it. The message, implicit in leaving nothing but an open, empty space. It was a taunt, a re-emergence. I pulled out my own worn phone, its contacts list a relic of a life I'd tried to forget. My fingers hovered over a name, an old colleague. The sergeant. He wouldn't want to hear from me. No one in that world did. But I couldn't ignore this, not now. The ghost of the collector, a specter I'd tried to bury under layers of regret and isolation, was stirring, and it felt like he was calling my name. The sea continued its endless rhythm, oblivious to the storm brewing within me. I closed my eyes, picturing the Oakhaven vault, pristine and violated. How? The question burned, a familiar ache. I'd spent years asking it about the collector's disappearances, and I'd failed to find an answer. Now it was back, a fresh wound reopening old scars. Was I merely projecting, desperate for a purpose, or had the nightmare truly returned? Yet beneath it, a stubborn resolve began to harden. I had to know. I had to find out if the past had truly come back to haunt me, or if I was simply haunting myself. The owner's words, heavy with the scent of brine and stale coffee, clung to the air long after he'd retreated into the cabin's dim interior. Sounds like my kind of trouble, Cole. He was right. A truth I had tried to bury beneath years of quiet mornings, and the rhythmic cast of a fishing line now clawed its way to the surface. Oakhaven Gallery, its security chief, a pompous man named Finch, had always boasted of an impenetrable fortress. Now it was breached. The pale blush of dawn grew bolder, painting the eastern sky in bruised purples and cold oranges. I stood on the small dock, the lake water lapping at the pilings, a mournful, insistent sound, my kind of trouble. The phrase was a hook, sharp and familiar, sinking into old wounds. I had walked away from the city's grim ballet, from the dance with shadows and blood. But some music once heard cannot be entirely forgotten. This new note, echoing the discordant melody of my past, plucked at a forgotten string. A ghost stirred within me, a phantom ache. The last time I had followed the wrong scent, misread the signs. A failure etched into my soul, a testament to my fall from grace. That would be a different kind of failure, one I might not survive. My knuckles, still raw from a stubborn knot in a fishing net, tightened. The quiet life was a balm, but a false one. It couldn't mend what was truly broken. My mind, long accustomed to the slow drift of current and the patience of the angler, began to shift gears. It was a rusty grind at first, protesting the sudden demand for speed and precision. Finch, he was the first thread, but official channels were closed to me, sealed by the very disgrace that kept me here. I found my old, cracked flip phone beneath a stack of fishing magazines in my cabin, its battery surprisingly holding a charge. The display flickered to life, a small, anachronistic beacon. I scrolled through a handful of numbers, ghosts of a former life. One name, a contact from the underbelly I once navigated, stood out. The collector. He dealt in information as readily as he did in stolen artifacts, a spider at the center of a vast, intricate web. He owed me, not a favor precisely, but a subtle debt from a time I'd looked the other way. The call connected on the third ring. A raspy voice like gravel dragged over stone answered. "Ira, Ghost Cole, Oakhaven Gallery, I need details." A pause. The sound of distant seagulls, even through the phone line. High profile. "I'm aware. And I, of all people, want to hear about it." The collector's tone held a note of genuine surprise, perhaps even amusement. The irony is rich even for me. "Where can we talk?" I cut him off, unwilling to entertain his veiled jabs. "There's a fishing boat 12 miles offshore, transfer point. Meet me there tonight, midnight, don't be late. And don't bring company." The air grew heavy with anticipation, a different kind of tension than the quiet hum of the lake. Each item was a layer shed from my current existence, a costume for a role I had sworn off. The drone of the outboard motor was a monotonous companion, pushing me further and further from the deceptive calm of the shore. 2 hours later, navigating by the faint glow of a handheld GPS and the memory of star charts, I spotted it. A rusty, nondescript trawler, its single mast silhouetted against the horizon. The fishing boat, 12 miles offshore, transfer point. It bobbed gently in the swells, a lonely sentinel. I cut my engine 100 yards out, drifting silently towards its stern. A figure emerged from the trawler's cabin, a bulky silhouette against the dim deck lights. He dropped a rope ladder over the side without a word. Climbing aboard, the deck felt alien beneath my feet, swaying with a rhythm I hadn't felt in years. The smell of diesel and stale fish was overpowering. The collector, his face a roadmap of hard living, gestured towards a small table bolted to the deck. "So, Oakhaven," he began, his voice barely audible over the creak of the hull. "Clean, too clean. They took the sleeping nymph sculpture, a minor piece, but valuable enough. Left the more famous broken heart sapphire in its display case, untouched." My brow furrowed. Untouched. Finch boasted about that sapphire's laser grid. Why leave it? The collector shrugged, a movement that rippled through his heavy frame. "That's not the half of it. The security system, disabled from the inside, no forced entry, no alarms tripped. The surveillance footage, wiped clean but not just erased. Edited, loops of empty corridors running for hours. Edited footage like a film editor cut it. Precisely. A ghost moved through that gallery. And the signature." He paused, his gaze fixed on mine, a flicker of something knowing in his eyes. They left a single white orchid on the pedestal where the sculpture had been, placed carefully, almost reverently. My breath hitched. A white orchid. The air grew thin, the smell of the sea turning metallic, a ghost. an edited timeline, a single white orchid. It was a punch to the diaphragm, stealing the air from my lungs. This wasn't just a heist. This was a message. That's what I'm telling Cole. Sounds like someone's trying to send a very specific message, or perhaps remind someone of a very specific ghost. Doubt, a venomous serpent, began to slither through my mind. Was I truly so blind all those years ago? The orchid. It hadn't been a signature then, not explicitly, but a presence, a lingering scent, a feeling of meticulous care around the scenes. My failure had been definitive, public. But what if the details I had dismissed as incidental were, in fact, the very threads that connected everything? The thought was a bitter gall on my tongue. I had been so certain, so convinced I had understood the monster. The ghost of an orchid scent clung to my memory, a phantom bloom from a grave long settled. I spent the morning sifting through the dust motes of my past, not in a physical archive, but in the brittle, yellowed pages of my own mind. That presence, I recalled, subtle as a whisper in a crowded room. Had it been a signature all along, a deliberate flourish, easily dismissed by those who sought only blood and obvious motive? The thought was a burr beneath my skin, a constant itch. My solitude, once a balm, now felt like a cage of my own making. The city outside, a tapestry of muted grays and urgent sounds, seemed to hum with a secret I was meant to uncover. Then the television, a flickering eye in the corner of my small space, spat out news that ripped through the quiet like a gunshot. A third strike. This time, it wasn't a vault or a museum's display. It was the entire contents of a secure transport en route from a private collector to an auction house. Priceless antiquities, not just gems or gold, but artifacts of immense historical weight. The audacity of it, the sheer, theatrical nerve, sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with cold. This wasn't about simple greed. It was about the spectacle, the grand gesture. I felt the familiar pull, a magnetic force dragging me back into the grime and shadow. My hand trembled as I reached for the old, worn jacket. The past was not merely echoing, it was screaming. The scene was a tangled knot of flashing lights and official vehicles, an orchestrated chaos on the arterial road leading out of the city. The transport vehicle, a hulking, armored beast, lay on its side. Its reinforced doors peeled open like a sardine can. No shots fired, the initial reports claimed. No forced entry, not in the traditional sense. Just vanished. The contents, the guards, the driver, all gone, leaving only the husk of the truck. A young officer, fresh-faced and earnest, attempted to cordon off a wider perimeter. Another, older and wearier, spoke into a handheld radio, his voice tight with frustration. A flicker of movement caught my eye near the overturned vehicle. A small, almost insignificant detail that most would overlook amidst the shattered glass and debris. Tucked beneath a broken piece of chrome, barely visible, was a single crimson petal. Not a rose, not a poppy. Its shape, its delicate veins were unmistakably those of a phalaenopsis orchid. My breath hitched. It was a flourish, a signature. Not just a presence, but the presence. My blood thrummed with a renewed, terrible certainty. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a taunt. He knew I was watching, or he wanted me to. I retreated before any familiar faces could spot me. The official channels would be a labyrinth of skepticism and suspicion for me. My mind raced, trying to piece together the logistics of such a daring theft. How could an entire transport, with its crew, simply vanish? The pieces, disparate and sharp, began to click into a grim mosaic. A secure transport. Vanished, precious artifacts. An orchid petal and the sea. The sea was the only place where something so large could disappear without a trace in a landlocked area, or so it seemed. The coastline wasn't far. My instincts, honed by years of walking the razor's edge, screamed for me to follow the trail to the water. A dock worker, his face a roadmap of hard living, mentioned a late-night departure from a less frequented pier, a vessel not usually seen there. A fishing boat. He'd grumbled, but it had the silhouette of something larger, something built for more than just hauling nets. The information was thin, but it was a thread, and I pulled at it with the desperation of a man drowning. The vessel, according to the dock worker's hazy recollection, had headed southwest. Offshore, the biting wind whipped my hair as I stood on the desolate pier, the air thick with the smell of brine and diesel. The dark waters stretched out before me, an inscrutable canvas beneath a bruised sky. My heart, a trapped bird, hammered against my ribs. Then a distant silhouette, a vessel low in the water, its profile matching the dock worker's description. It was too far for details, but its bearing was unmistakable. It was heading towards the coordinates I'd scrounged, a point on the charts marked only by a depth reading and a faint, almost erased notation. I managed to secure a small, fast craft. Another favor called in, another debt incurred. The grizzled owner, a man with eyes that had seen too many sunrises, merely grunted, accepting my payment without question. He knew better than to ask. The journey was a bone-jarring dance across the choppy waves. The sea was unforgiving, the vastness of it a stark reminder of my own insignificance. Doubt, that persistent serpent, coiled in my gut. Was I chasing a ghost, a figment of my own broken past? Or was I finally seeing what had always been there, hidden in plain sight? As I approached the coordinates, the air grew heavy, charged with a silent tension. The other vessel, now clearer in the fading light, was indeed a fishing boat, but its deck was strangely empty of nets or traps. Instead, figures moved with a practiced efficiency. And then I saw it, tied alongside another smaller boat. A transfer point, my breath caught. This was it, the missing link. The place where the stolen antiquities would be moved, swallowed by the ocean's anonymity, or transported to a waiting, larger ship further out. I cut my engine, letting the current carry me closer, hoping the twilight and the waves would mask my approach. The fishing boat, 12 miles offshore, transfer point, loomed larger now. I could make out voices, low and guttural, carried on the wind. And then, a glint of metal in the hands of one of the figures. Not fishing gear, a weapon. The stakes had just risen, not just for the city, but for me. I was no longer an observer. The phantom bloom of the orchid still clung to me, a tenacious whisper in the quiet chambers of my mind. It was a scent without a source, a memory without a firm anchor, yet it pulsed beneath the surface of my thoughts as I spread the maps and dossiers across my scarred table. The recent heists, meticulously executed, lay before me not as isolated incidents, but as pieces of a fractured mosaic I was determined to reassemble. I traced the lines of acquisition, the dates of the operations, the profiles of the victims. A gallery owner, a rare coin collector, a diamond merchant on the surface, disparate targets, united only by the glittering promise of their wares. But I saw past the sparkle, past the obvious lure of wealth. I felt for the hidden thread, the invisible sinew connecting them. My fingers brushed against the glossy photographs of the crime scenes, each one a tableau of precise, almost artistic violation. No wasted motion, no frantic scramble, just surgical precision, a signature etched in the very absence of struggle. It was that chilling orderliness that gnawed at me, mirroring the ghosts of my past. I noted the locations of their primary residences, their secondary properties, their business headquarters. I cross-referenced their names against obscure databases, their financial dealings, their social circles. The hours bled into one another, marked only by the shifting light through the grime-streaked window and the growing stack of discarded notes. Then a flicker, not a grand revelation, but a faint shimmer, like heat rising from asphalt. The gallery owner, the coin collector, the diamond merchant. Beyond their current affluence, beyond the immediate value of what was stolen. They shared a history, a specific kind of history. Each had at some point in their careers been involved in the acquisition or sale of artifacts with unverified provenance. Not necessarily illegal, not overtly criminal, but gray. Objects with stories that didn't quite add up, origins shrouded in convenient mist. A tremor ran through me. It wasn't about the money, not entirely. It was about what they possessed, or perhaps how they came to possess it. A motive beyond simple greed began to coalesce, cold and sharp as a shard of ice. This wasn't just a plunderer, it was a collector or perhaps a rectifier. The notion solidified, turning the brittle pages of my memory to fresh paper. The old case. The serial killer I'd hunted, the one whose methods these new heists echoed like a distant, terrible echo. He too had a peculiar interest, a ritualistic selection of his victims, all tied to a single, obscure thread that I had almost, but not quite, unraveled. Could it be the same thread? My phone, a relic of a bygone era, buzzed on the table. A single encrypted message. No sender ID, just a string of coordinates and a time, an hour from now. Offshore, the air in the room thickened, suddenly too heavy to breathe. This wasn't a random tip. This was an invitation or a warning. The moon, a sliver of bone, offered little comfort, its light swallowed by the Inkai expanse. I navigated by the glow of the GPS, a tiny, unwavering beacon guiding me toward the coordinates. My heart hammered, not with fear, but with a grim anticipation. This was the precipice. The outline of another boat materialized ahead, a silhouette against the barely perceptible horizon. A fishing vessel, its nets neatly stowed, its deck lights dim. This was it, the fishing boat 12 miles offshore, transfer point. I raised my binoculars, the cold metal pressing against my brow. Two figures moved on the deck. One, a burly figure in oilskins, seemed to be the captain. He carried a small, nondescript case like a briefcase, but handled it with a reverence that spoke of its extraordinary contents. My breath hitched. The way the hooded figure moved, the precise economy of his gestures, the way he tilted his head, as if listening to a silent frequency, it stirred something deep and unsettling within me. A ghost of a memory, a flicker of recognition that brushed against the edges of my awareness. The transfer was swift. The hooded figure exchanged the case for a smaller, flat package from the captain. No words seemed to pass between them, just a nod, a silent acknowledgement. As the hooded figure turned to leave, a gust of wind lifted the edge of his hood, just for a fleeting moment. I caught a glimpse of something beneath. A tiny, silver pin affixed to his lapel, shaped like a delicate, unfurling blossom. An orchid, the world tilted. The phantom scent, the memory that had haunted me, suddenly solidified, anchored itself to that tiny metallic bloom. It wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. The serial killer from my past had left a similar calling card, not an actual orchid, but a stylized image, a specific type of orchid, pressed into the skin of his victims, a signature I had always struggled to fully comprehend. Haphioptilum bellicillum, the lady slipper orchid. The hooded figure descended into the cabin, and the fishing boat's engine roared to life, turning slowly, heading east. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening finality. The targets weren't just dealing in murky artifacts. They were all connected, in some tangential way, to the very historical period or cultural origin of the specific artifacts the old killer had been obsessed with. The items stolen in these new heists, I now realized, were not merely valuable. They were pieces of a puzzle, fragments of a specific ancient lineage. The pattern, the motive beyond greed, the link to my past, it was all there, laid bare by a sliver of moonlight and a fleeting glimpse of a pin. The killer wasn't just mirroring the methods, he was continuing the work. Or perhaps he was never caught at all. Perhaps he had simply gone dormant, waiting for the right moment to re-emerge, to finish what he started. Had I been so blind, so utterly consumed by my own failure that I missed the obvious connection all those years ago? The orchid, it had always been there, a silent accusation. My own judgment, once a steadfast compass, now spun wildly untrustworthy. And I, Cole, was standing directly in its path. The phantom bloom still clung, a spectral shroud woven into the fabric of my senses. It was a scent that had no right to linger, a ghost in the periphery. Yet it pulsed beneath the surface as I traced the jagged edges of a coastal chart. The heists, a grotesque echo from a buried past, whispered of a new terror, but the orchid, that insidious floral note, sang a different, older song. I knew where it led, or rather, where a thread, tenuous as spun moonlight, pointed. A whisper from a forgotten contact, a coded message intercepted by sheer, desperate luck, had painted a picture of movement, of clandestine cargo and silent transactions far from the shore's judging eye. The old trawler, christened the Silent Daughter in peeling blue letters, cut a slow, ponderous furrow through the restless gray-green. The engine thrummed a low, constant complaint against the vast indifference of the sea. 12 miles out, the land was a smudged charcoal line against the horizon, a world away. He asked no questions, offered no counsel, a perfect, blank canvas for my desperate gamble. The coordinates led us to a patch of water indistinguishable from any other, yet I felt it, a subtle shift in the air, a tension that hummed just beneath the roar of the waves. This was it, the fishing boat 12 miles offshore, transfer point. My contact, the skipper of the Silent Daughter, cut the engine, letting the trawler drift. I watched the other boat, a hulking silhouette against the pre-dawn gloom. Figures moved on its deck, indistinct, purposeful. Years had passed since I'd felt this familiar tremor of anticipation, this razor's edge of danger. I climbed aboard the other boat via a rope ladder, each rung slick with brine, the metal biting into my palms. My boots landed softly on the wet deck. The air here was thick with the smell of diesel and stale fish, a pungent curtain for the drama unfolding. My gaze, however, was fixed on a man standing near the stern, leaning against a stack of crates. He was lean, dressed in expensive, waterproof gear, his face sharp, intelligent, but with a predatory glint in his eyes. This was the handler, the man whose name had been whispered in the dark corners of the city, a ghost from the periphery of the old case, now solidified into flesh and bone. "Cole," the handler said, his voice a low rasp cutting through the din of the waves. He didn't sound surprised. "Thought you'd learn to stay buried." "Some things refuse to stay down," I replied, my voice steady despite the adrenaline prickling my skin. "Like a bad penny or a certain orchid." A flicker, swift as a fish in murky water, crossed his face. His eyes narrowed. "The flower, what about it?" "It keeps blooming," I pressed, stepping closer, the deck swaying beneath my feet. "In places it shouldn't, around jobs that shouldn't be happening, jobs that remind me of a ghost you used to run errands for." He laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Errands. I run a legitimate enterprise, moving goods, nothing more." He gestured vaguely at the crates. "Fresh catch bound for market." My eyes swept over the crates. They were too uniform, too carefully stacked. The faint, sweet scent of the sea mingled with something else, something metallic and sharp, not quite fish. A legitimate enterprise that just happens to use the same logistical patterns as a serial killer from a decade ago, I challenged. The same drop zones, same obscure rendezvous points, even the same. That killer is long gone, dust in the wind, and his methods, plenty of people learned from his efficiency. But only one man knew his private language. I countered, recalling a detail from the original case files, a subtle code of markings on the killer's caches that was never released to the public. The way he marked his transfer points, a specific notch on the underside of the crates, a small, almost invisible symbol. I found it on the blueprints of the latest heist, and I found it here. I pointed to a barely visible, jagged scratch on the crate nearest him, a mark I'd spotted even in the dim light. His eyes widened fractionally. It was a detail so obscure, so insignificant to anyone but the original investigators, that his reaction was all the confirmation I needed. He had been there. He knew. "You're mad," he hissed, the easy composure cracking. "Obsessed. It's a coincidence. A trick of the light. Coincidences don't smell like orchids," I said. As if summoned by my words, the phantom scent intensified, a cloying sweetness that was suddenly sickening. "And they don't involve a specific variety of orchid that only grows in one remote region, a region connected to the killer's past. How would you know that, unless you were privy to details only the killer and his closest associates would possess?" His jaw clenched. "You're out of your depth, Cole. You always were." His gaze flickered to the deckhands, a silent command passing between them. A sudden jarring blow struck me from behind, a heavy weight slamming into my kidneys. I staggered, the breath punched from my lungs, my vision momentarily blurring. The deckhand, a hulking figure, moved with surprising speed, his fist already cocked for another strike. I twisted, ducking under the next swing, my own movements rusty, but driven by a primal need. My hand found purchase on the deckhand's arm, twisting, using his momentum against him. He grunted, stumbling back, but his partner was already advancing, a heavy wrench clutched in his hand. The handler watched, an almost bored expression on his face, but his eyes were calculating. He wasn't getting involved directly, but he was orchestrating the chaos. I dodged a swing from the wrench, the metal whistling past my ear. The near miss a stark reminder of how quickly this could go wrong. I felt a sharp pain as the first deckhand landed a glancing blow on my shoulder. I was outnumbered, out of practice, and on their territory. My focus narrowed. I needed a distraction and escape. My gaze swept the deck, landing on a coiled rope. A desperate idea formed. Feinting left, I drew the deckhand with the wrench closer, then spun, grabbing the rope and yanking it hard, sending a cascade of empty crates clattering down. The noise was deafening, echoing across the water. In the confusion, I pushed past the handler, who made a half-hearted attempt to grab me, his fingers scraping my jacket. "You won't get away with this, Cole," he snarled. I ignored him, scrambling towards the side, the rope ladder I'd used earlier now pulled up. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum against the backdrop of the crashing waves. My escape route was gone. Then a glint. A small metallic object lay near the crates I'd disturbed, a flash of silver against the grimy deck. As the deckhands advanced, closing in, I lunged, snatching it up. It was a small, ornate silver locket, tarnished but still recognizable, bearing a faded, almost indistinguishable engraving of a flowering orchid. This wasn't just a clue, it was a personal relic, something the killer cherished. But my victory was fleeting. A heavy hand clamped down on my shoulder, spinning me around. The wrench-wielding deckhand brought the heavy tool down in a vicious arc. I raised my arm, instinct overriding caution. A searing pain exploded in my forearm as the metal connected, a sickening crack echoing in the salt-laced air. My grip on the locket loosened, and it tumbled from my numb fingers, skittering across the deck, then vanishing over the side, swallowed by the dark water. I cried out, more from frustration than pain, as the deckhands converged. I crumpled, gasping, my arm hanging uselessly. I was so close, but now I've lost my little trinket, and I'll find nothing else here. He kicked my good side, a sharp, precise blow. Consider this a warning. The killer, or his echo, was still out there, closer than ever, and I had just handed him a victory. The salt spray woke me. A sharp slap across my face that stung my eyes and cleared the fog from my skull. My head throbbed, a dull, insistent ache behind my temple, a crude reminder of the boot that had sent me into the void. I lay sprawled on rough wooden planks, the scent of diesel and stale fish heavy in the air, a constant companion to the rhythmic creak of timbers and the slap of waves against a hull. The world pitched and rolled beneath me, a relentless cradle of discomfort. I was on the fishing boat 12 miles offshore, transfer point, exactly as I'd feared. My wrists were bound, thick rope chafing against skin already raw from previous encounters. I tested the knots, a futile, muscle-straining effort, but my limbs felt like lead, my strength sapped. Through blurred vision, I took in my surroundings. Nets, coiled ropes, empty crates, and the glint of a gaff hook leaning against the cabin wall. A solitary figure sat on an upturned bucket near the outlined against the gray dawn sky, watching me with an unnerving stillness. The handler, the same retreating back I'd seen before the darkness claimed me. Awake, are we, Cole? The handler's voice was a low rasp, cutting through the boat's groans. There was no triumph in it, only a quiet, almost clinical observation. Took I long enough? I pushed myself up, gritting my teeth against the surge of pain. Where are we going? My voice was rough, a stranger's utterance. The handler chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. That, my friend, is a question with a rather complicated answer. For now, let's just say I read on the path to understanding. I studied the handler, searching for anything new. The same weathered face, the same faded jacket, but something in the eyes seemed different today, a glint of anticipation, perhaps. My mind, despite the bruising, began to sift through the fragments. The heists, the meticulous planning, the signature of the orchid. It all pointed to someone with an intimate knowledge of my past, not just a casual admirer of a killer's work. The orchid, I rasped, letting the word hang in the salty air. It's a message, isn't it? Not just a calling card. The handler's lips curved into a faint smile. I always were good at connecting the dots, Cole. Sometimes too good, sometimes not good enough. The sting of those words was sharper than the salt spray. Not good enough. It echoed the shame that had followed me for years, the ghost of the one I'd failed to catch. I watched the handler's hands, noting the calluses, the way the fingers twitched, almost restlessly. Not the hands of a desk jockey, but someone who worked, someone who built, or perhaps dismantled. I ran not just moving stolen goods, I pressed, my mind racing. This isn't about profit, not primarily. The precision, the theatrics, it's a performance. The handler leaned forward, resting elbows on knees. And what do I suppose the encore might be? I thought of the locket, the one I'd glimpsed, the one I felt a pull towards. It didn't fit. A small, intimate trinket amid such grand, violent gestures, unless the entire grand gesture was deeply, personally intimate. It's about him, I stated, referring to the original killer, the one I'd pursued, or what he represented. But I read not him, I read too deliberate, too focused on the message rather than the chaos. A slight nod from the handler. Closer, Cole, always closer. Then the handler reached into an inner pocket and withdrew something, not a weapon but a small, worn leather-bound journal. It looked old, its pages yellowed. My breath caught, it was too familiar. Remember this? The handler asked, holding it up. Evidence from the first crime scene, a journal kept by one of the victims. I dismissed it, said it was irrelevant. The ramblings of a troubled mind. My stomach churned. I did remember. A young woman, an artist, found in a warehouse. Her journal was filled with sketches, poetry, and cryptic notes. The artistic ramblings had seemed a distraction. A terrible, crushing wave of doubt washed over me. Had I been wrong? Had I missed something so fundamental? It was hers. A sketch she'd made, a flower from her garden, pressed between the pages of this journal. I overlooked it, just like I overlooked everything else. The pieces slammed into place with a sickening thud. The heists, mirroring the original killer's methods, yes, but with an added layer of intricate detail, a precision that felt almost artistic in its execution. The message over the chaos. The handler wasn't just a copycat or an admirer. This wasn't about the killer, but about the victims. Specifically, a victim, Ira. It explained the intimate knowledge, the burning sense of injustice, the meticulous planning. The handler's gaze hardened. Her older sibling, the one who watched her disappear into that warehouse, the one who tried to tell Cole that he was more than just a name on a file, that her art, her words, her orchid, they meant something. A pause, heavy with years of unspoken grief and rage. I called me the grieving relative, dismissed my concerns as emotional interference. The perpetrator wasn't a new monster, but a consequence of my own past failures. This wasn't just a series of heists. It was a carefully orchestrated act of retribution, a twisted performance designed to force me to see what I had once overlooked, to confront the truth of my own blind spots. The handler wasn't just mirroring a killer, they were mirroring my investigative process, meticulously correcting every perceived error, every dismissal. The heists, I managed, my mind reeling. They're not just about taking things, they're about recreating the circumstances, the feeling of her loss, each target, each stolen item. It's a symbol, a way to make me understand what I felt, what she felt. The handler's smile was thin, devoid of warmth. Ira catching up Cole, a little late perhaps, but better late than never. The truth, I see, isn't always found in the obvious places. The handler's head snapped up, a flicker of irritation crossing the usually impassive face. Problem? I asked, a spark of hope igniting in my chest. The handler ignored me, quickly moving to the cabin entrance, speaking in low, urgent tones to someone inside I couldn't see. The sudden shift in control, the unexpected hiccup in their meticulously planned operation, was a crack in their composure. I watched, my heart thrumming a frantic rhythm against my ribs. This was it. The true nature of the threat wasn't just a series of heists, or even revenge for a victim. It was a meticulously crafted, deeply personal confrontation, designed to shatter my world and rebuild it on the foundations of my past mistakes. And the person orchestrating it all was closer to the original case than I could have ever imagined, a ghost from my own failures, now materialized with a terrifying purpose. The locket, the phantom orchid, the journal, all of it coalesced into a single devastating truth. This wasn't just about catching a criminal, it was about atoning for a sin. And I was now trapped on a fishing boat 12 miles offshore, transfer point, the stage set for the final act of a play I had unknowingly helped to write. The handler's gaze, usually as flat as the horizon line, sharpened, fixing on the dead console. A muscle in the jaw twitched, the only tell of a frustration that ran deeper than a mere mechanical hiccup. The rhythmic slap of water against the hull, once a backdrop, now seemed to mark the abrupt silence. "Stay put," the handler commanded, the voice a low rasp, already moving towards the stern, where the engine cover hummed with a recent, now extinguished, warmth. I watched, my senses alert, the salt spray a cool kiss on my face. The handler's movements were efficient, practiced, mechanics grace under pressure. Wires were checked, connections rattled, the air thick with the metallic scent of oil and diesel. But the silence persisted, a heavy shroud settling over the fishing boat 12 miles offshore, transfer point. My mind, a restless tide, began to churn. Was this merely an unfortunate coincidence? The timing felt too precise, too theatrical for simple bad luck. I scanned the vast, indifferent expanse of water, then the boat itself. A fishing vessel, yes, but stripped of much of its gear, repurposed for quieter, less conventional cargo. The deck was mostly bare, save for a few coiled ropes and a stack of empty crates. Nothing seemed out of place, yet the hairs on my arms prickled with an unshakable unease. The handler grunted, a sound of pure exasperation. Fuel line, clogged. My spark of hope, momentarily kindled by the delay, now shifted, hardening into a grim certainty. This wasn't an accident. This was a deliberate strand in the intricate web the perpetrator was weaving, a message perhaps, or a calculated pause. We were vulnerable, adrift in the vast, unforgiving blue. The sun, a brazen eye, beat down, turning the water into a shimmering, deceptive mirror. I moved to the bow, leaning over the railing, staring into the depths. The ocean's secrets, I thought, ran deeper than any human could fathom. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The handler, after a futile attempt to clear the line, began rigging a makeshift sail from a tarpaulin and a spare mast, a desperate measure against the current. The wind, however, was fickle, merely teasing us with gentle sighs. My eyes, ever searching, drifted over the boat's exterior. That's when I saw it. Tucked into a small, rusty cleat near the stern, almost hidden by a dangling rope, was a small, waterproof box. It was not part of the boat's standard equipment. It had a sleek, modern design, a stark contrast to the weathered wood and faded paint of the vessel. My breath hitched. This was it, the message. "Hold on," I called out, my voice cutting through the desultory flapping of the makeshift sail. The handler looked up, eyes narrowed, following my gaze. I moved with a sudden urgency, my heart thrumming a frantic rhythm against my ribs. My fingers, surprisingly steady, unclipped the box. It was heavier than it looked, solid, crafted with an unnerving precision. The first was a tarnished silver locket, no bigger than my thumbnail. My breath caught in my throat. I knew this locket, or one exactly like it. My old partner years ago had given a similar one to his daughter. A small, sentimental gift before that fateful shift, a talisman of sorts. My fingers, trembling now, pried it open. Inside, instead of a faded photograph, was a tightly folded slip of paper, no larger than a postage stamp. I unfolded it carefully. The paper crisp and dry. The words, scrawled in a precise, almost elegant hand, were few, but they struck me like a physical blow. "The ghost of the past still walks Cole, and she remembers your face." The second item in the box was a photograph. It was a recent shot, taken from a distance, slightly grainy. It showed a small, unassuming suburban house, its porch light glowing softly in the twilight. It was the house of the widow of my former partner, the woman I had promised, in my youthful arrogance, to protect, the woman I had failed when the killer slipped away. A wave of nausea washed over me, mingling with a surge of white-hot rage. My past wasn't just haunting me, it was being weaponized. The perpetrator wasn't just mirroring old crimes, they were dancing on the graves of my failures, pulling the strings of my deepest regrets. The message was unmistakable. The killer knew me, knew my history, my connection, my vulnerabilities. This wasn't about the heists anymore, not just about the money or the spectacle. It was personal, it was a direct challenge. My hands clenched, the locket and photograph almost crushing under the pressure. The handler, sensing the shift in my demeanor, took a step closer. "What is it?" The voice was gruff, but held a flicker of genuine concern. I looked up, my eyes, I knew, blazing with a renewed, terrible resolve. The vast, indifferent ocean no longer felt empty. It felt like a stage, set for a final, brutal act. The game had changed. The rules had been rewritten. The killer wasn't just playing with me, they were coming for me, and for those I had sworn to protect. The stakes, once high, had just been raised to an unbearable, soul-crushing height. I had to move faster than ever before, or watch my past consume my future, piece by agonizing piece. The photograph, clutched in my hand, felt like a shard of ice against my palm. The soft glow of the porch light in the grainy image did little to warm the chill that had settled deep in my bones. It was the house of the widow of the first victim, the one whose disappearance had set the whole bloody cascade into motion years ago. Her husband, a quiet academic, had been the initial ripple in a wave that had ultimately drowned my career. My breath hitched, a ragged sound in the quiet space. The heists weren't just mirroring the methods, they were tracing the very fault lines of the past, picking at the unhealed scars. Why her? Why now? The previous targets had been collections of rare artifacts, high-value art, or obscure scientific instruments. But a suburban house, a widow living a life of quiet grief, this wasn't about monetary gain, not purely. This was personal. This was a message, etched in the familiar lines of a tragedy I thought I'd buried. I paced, the floorboards groaning beneath my weight, a counterpoint to the frantic rhythm of my thoughts. The serial killer had never targeted families directly, only the primary victims. This new perpetrator, however, seemed to be completing an unfinished symphony, or perhaps correcting a perceived oversight. They weren't just mimicking, they were evolving the game. What did the widow possess that was so vital? Not wealth. I remembered her husband's modest pension. Not influence. My mind raced back through the original case files, the endless rereadings, the sleepless nights spent trying to find the missing link. The academic had been known for his research into obscure historical texts, particularly those detailing ancient trade routes and forgotten artifacts. A spark ignited in the dark corners of my memory. He had been close to publishing a paper, a contentious theory about a specific, highly valuable artifact believed lost for centuries. Could this be it? The true prize, hidden in plain sight, or perhaps merely hinted at in his research notes? The heists, I realized, were not just about the stolen items themselves, but about drawing attention, creating a narrative, perhaps even funding the search for something else entirely. And if the widow's husband was researching a lost artifact, it stood to reason that his notes, his research, might be hidden within his home, perhaps even in plain sight. Dismissed as sentimental clutter, my gaze fell upon the other item in the box, the single, unadorned seashell. It was a common scallop, bleached white by the sun, smooth from the ceaseless tumble of the ocean. A sudden, sharp memory. The academic in his youth had been an amateur marine biologist. He'd published a small, almost forgotten article on rare mollusk species found off the coast. The seashell wasn't random. It was a signature, a taunt, a clue. The perpetrator needed to complete their collection or their understanding. And if they believed the widow held the key, they would come for it. But how? A direct assault on a suburban home, however quiet, carried too much risk. No, these operations were precise, almost surgical. They needed a transfer point, a place where an item could vanish without a trace. A plan began to form, a desperate, dangerous gambit. I knew the perpetrator valued discretion, secrecy, and a certain theatrical flair. If I could create the illusion that the item they sought from the widow's home was being moved, transported to a secure offshore location for a clandestine exchange, they would be drawn out. It was a calculated risk, a lure dangled in the deepest, murkiest waters. I reached for my burner phone, the cheap plastic cool against my ear. My contact, a former colleague from my days on the force, answered on the second ring, his voice gruff with suspicion. I needed a favor, a big one, cloaked in enough plausible deniability to keep him out of trouble and me out of a cell. I need to arrange a secure transfer, I stated, my voice low and steady. Something sensitive, 12 miles offshore, no questions, just the vessel and a small crew. I said, my gaze fixed on the grainy photograph, but I think I know who's holding the match. I spent the next few hours meticulously setting the stage, weaving a web of misinformation and carefully placed rumors. I let it be known through a circuitous path, one that would eventually reach the ears of the underworld's more discerning collectors, that a highly sought-after research compendium detailing the location of a legendary artifact was being secretly transported. It was a fabrication, a phantom treasure, but one believable enough to pique the interest of someone obsessed with the past. The transfer point, I specified, would be a fishing boat 12 miles offshore, a place where the currents could erase all tracks. As dusk bled into night, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges, I found myself on the deck of a small, nondescript trawler. The air was thick with the scent of salt and diesel, the rhythmic slap of waves against the hull a monotonous drumbeat. The captain, a grizzled man with eyes that had seen too much, gave me a wary glance, but asked no questions. He was a man who understood unspoken agreements. The vast expanse of the ocean felt both liberating and terrifying. This was my trap, laid out on the shifting canvas of the sea. I had predicted their meticulous nature, their reliance on stealth and precision. I had appealed to their hunger for the elusive, the historically significant. But as the hours crawled by, a gnawing doubt began to fester. Had I overplayed my hand? There was my understanding of this new perpetrator flawed. What if they didn't bite? What if they saw through the ruse, recognized it as the desperate act of a disgraced man? The silence was profound, broken only by the mournful cry of a distant seabird. My own reflections stared back at me from the dark water, haggard, tense. This wasn't just about catching a criminal. It was about proving I hadn't lost my edge, that the past hadn't completely broken me. Then, a faint flicker on the horizon. It was moving, approaching. My muscles tensed, every nerve ending screaming. The captain, sensing my change, turned, his eyes narrowed. "Looks like company," he grunted, his hand instinctively going to the wheel. The light grew stronger, resolving into the silhouette of a smaller, faster vessel, cutting through the waves with predatory grace. It wasn't a fishing boat. It was sleeker, built for speed and stealth. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. This was it. The perpetrator had taken the bait. And would I be ready for it? The answers felt terrifyingly close, yet utterly unknowable. The fishing boat 12 miles offshore transfer point was about to become a crucible. The ocean tasted of salt and secrets, a vast, swallowing more beneath the inadequate gleam of the boat's deck lights. I stood by the stern, the rhythmic slap of waves against the hull, a metronome for my escalating tension. 12 miles offshore. The world was reduced to this swaying platform, a sliver of wood and steel adrift in an ink-black void. This was the fishing boat 12 miles offshore, transfer point, a stage set for a final, desperate act. My breath plumed in the cool night air, each exhalation a ghost of the man I used to be, the man who chased shadows through labyrinthine streets. The rumor, spun with painstaking precision, of a comprehensive compendium detailing the original killer's methods. Their hidden philosophy had spread like a phosphorescent bloom in the criminal deep. It was a lure, crafted from the very obsession that had defined my downfall. I knew it would draw them out. A distant thrum, a low growl barely audible above the ocean's murmur, began to prickle the hairs on my neck. A smaller craft, fast and sleek, cut through the water, its bow slicing the swells with silent purpose. They moved with an unnerving grace, a practiced economy of motion that spoke of long nights spent in the periphery. It was a voice I recognized, a voice that had once offered cryptic advice in hushed corners, a voice I had trusted in the years before the precipice. My gaze was unwavering. "I have answers," I corrected, a tremor I hoped they didn't detect in my own words. "Answers to questions you've been asking, answers to questions I've been asking for years." The figure stepped fully into the dim light. It was the collector, the man who had always been just outside my reach, a phantom whisper in the network of stolen art and illicit knowledge. He was not the original killer, I knew that now, but he was the conductor, the one pulling the strings of these recent, brutal performances. "The compendium," he pressed, ignoring my deflection, his voice laced with an avarice that was almost palpable. "The complete works of the master you promised." "I promised bait," I countered, letting the truth hang in the salty air, a bitter tang. A lure for the one who craved the artistry enough to replicate it, the one who understood the original killer's vision, not just as a criminal act, as a statement. A flicker of something, disappointment, then rage crossed his face. "You played me," he snarled, his composure cracking like old plaster. "All these years I thought you were just a broken shell, a detective who lost his way, but you were watching. Waiting." "I was watching you," I confirmed, my voice hardening. "I saw the patterns, the echoes, not just in the heists, but in the why. The theatricality, the deliberate misdirection, the framing of the scenes. They weren't just about the score, were they? They were about the story. Your story, perhaps, a continuation of the original killer's narrative, but with your own twisted signature." He let out a short, sharp laugh devoid of humor. "He was a visionary, Cole, a true artist. And you let him slip away. You couldn't comprehend his genius, could you? You saw only blood, only crime. I saw transcendence. And when he vanished, when his art was no longer gracing the canvas of this city, I had to pick up the brush. Someone had to ensure his legacy wasn't forgotten, to improve upon it." "Improve upon it?" I scoffed. "You've been staging macabre homages, not art, and you've been using innocent lives as your medium. Collateral damage." "Dismissed," waving a hand. "Necessary sacrifices for the greater good of the spectacle. And you, Cole, you were the perfect audience, the disgraced detective haunted by his failure. Each new tableau, each new echo of the past was a whisper in your ear, a challenge. Could you finally see he hadn't just been replicating the past, he'd been performing for me? He'd been trying to draw me back into the nightmare, to prove his superiority, to rub my nose in my past failures." It twisted my gut, a sickening realization of the depth of his obsession. "I think this is a game?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. "I think I'm still the broken man who let the original killer walk." "I am, Cole," he stated, his voice now dripping with contempt. "I always were, and now I've brought myself to me just as I intended. The compendium was a fiction, yes, but its purpose was real, to get I here, to finally settle this." He moved then. A blur of motion. A glint of metal flashed in his hand, a short, heavy club. I barely had time to react, to bring my arm up as he swung. The impact jarred my teeth, a dull thud against my forearm that sent a jolt of pain up to my shoulder. The deck pitched beneath us, the waves growing choppier, mirroring the sudden escalation of violence. I lunged, driving my shoulder into his chest, knocking his back against the railing. He grunted, recovering quickly, eyes burning with a manic intensity. He was stronger than he looked, fueled by a zealous conviction. We wrestled, bodies colliding, the metal club clattering against the boat's fixtures, the air filled with the smell of brine and sweat, the desperate scramble for dominance. I never understood, he hissed, twisting free, his breath ragged. The beauty of the meticulous plan, the elegance of the execution. I was always too crude, too focused on the ugly details. He aimed another blow, this time at my head. I ducked, feeling the wind of it graze my scalp, and countered with a swift kick to his knee. He stumbled, a sharp cry escaping his lips, but he didn't fall. He was relentless, a force of nature driven by a warped artistic vision. Reaching for it now felt like a death sentence. We were too close, too entangled. He had the advantage of surprise, of a fanatic's single-minded focus. And for a fleeting moment, a ghost of the old doubt whispered in my ear, "What if he's right? What if I never truly understood?" But the thought vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by the searing pain in my arm, the taste of salt on my tongue, the raw urgency of survival, and I would not fail again. He lunged, the club arcing down towards my head, a final, decisive strike. I saw it coming, a slow-motion descent in the dim, swaying light. The boat lurched violently, a rogue wave slamming against the hull, throwing us both off balance. It was just enough. I twisted, not away, but into the blow, letting my shoulder take the brunt, and simultaneously reached, not for my weapon, but for the man himself, my fingers closing around his throat. The world spun, a dizzying kaleidoscope of dark water and dim lights, the roar of the ocean a deafening crescendo. We teetered on the edge, locked in a deadly embrace, the fishing boat 12 miles offshore. Transfer point a precarious stage for our final, desperate dance. The club descended, not towards my head, but a feint, a blur meant to draw my guard high. My arm, still a throbbing knot of agony, instinctively rose, but my left foot was already pivoting, a desperate, practiced movement from an old life. The air whistled past my ear as the heavy wood missed its mark, striking the rusted metal bulkhead with a dull thud that vibrated through the floor plates. A shower of rust flakes dusted my hair. I didn't pause. Survival was a cold, sharp blade honed by years of failure and regret. My good arm, the left, snaked out not for a punch, but to hook the assailant's neck, pulling them off balance, leveraging their own momentum against them. We stumbled, a tangle of limbs and desperate breath, across the slick deck. The sea spray, sharp and cold, hit my face, a bracing slap against the haze of pain. The fishing boat, a sturdy vessel built for rough waters, pitched beneath us, making every step a gamble. A knee found my ribs, a dull ache blooming beneath the older scars. I grunted but held fast, my grip on the assailant's collar iron tight. My eyes, narrowed against the salt and the encroaching dawn, finally locked on theirs, and the world tilted, not with the sway of the ocean, but with the sickening lurch of understanding. It was the colleague. The shock was a bitter taste, metallic on my tongue, worse than any physical blow. The questions that had gnawed at me, the tiny discrepancies I dismissed as fatigue or paranoia, coalesced into a monstrous truth. The familiar gait, the way they held their shoulders, the glint in their eyes as they'd spoken of the old cases, all of it clicked into place with a horrifying finality. I rasped, the word a ragged expulsion of air. Their face, usually calm, was contorted now, a mask of grim fury. "I failed, Cole," they spat, their voice raw, stripped of its usual measured tone. I let him walk away. My brother, he deserved justice, not my pity. The revelation hit me like a rogue wave, washing away the last vestiges of doubt. My brother, the phantom limb of a family I'd never known. The original killer's final victim, the one whose body was never found, whose case had crumbled in my hands, leaving me disgraced. It wasn't just a colleague, it was a ghost, a living embodiment of my greatest failure. "This," I answered, my voice gaining strength, "this isn't justice, this is mimicry, a perversion." Their eyes blazed. "It's the only language I understand, the only way to make I see, to make I feel what it was like to watch him slip through my fingers, leaving a trail of blood and unanswered questions." They twisted, a desperate, animalistic strength born of years of suppressed grief and anger. The club, abandoned during our grapple, lay near the railing, gleaming dully in the first pale light. They lunged for it, but I was quicker. The shock had sharpened my senses, cut through the pain. My foot swept out, catching their ankle. They went down hard, a cry torn from their throat, pressed against their temple. "Tell me everything," I demanded, my voice low, laced with the salt and the fury of the ocean. The heists, the patterns, the fishing boat 12 miles offshore transfer point. How did I know his methods? How did I know about the boat? Tears streamed down their face, mixing with the spray. He left a journal they choked out, hidden, a sick, twisted testament. My brother found it, trying to understand before he disappeared. The boat was his escape, his final laugh. The journal detailed it all, every twisted ritual, every planned vanishing act. I found it years later, after I'd given up, after everyone had forgotten. A journal. A missing piece I'd never considered, never looked for. My gut twisted with a fresh wave of self-recrimination. All the clues, all the meticulous planning, laid out by the original monster, then replicated by a grieving sibling seeking vengeance. It was about the statement. The original killer used this boat to move his illicit gains, his final escape route after the last disappearance. He'd planned to use it for my brother too. I arranged for a buyer, a fence, to meet me here, for the stolen goods. But it was a trap for you, for him if he ever showed his face again. The raw truth hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The fishing boat 12 miles offshore transfer point wasn't just a location. It was the nexus of two tragedies, a stage for a macabre play. The original killer had planned to use it, and now his methods, his very escape route, were being used against me by a victim's relative, driven to the edge of reason. I looked out at the vast, indifferent ocean, the sky now a bruised purple. The horizon was a thin, trembling line, just I and the ghost of my brother. They shook their head, a silent acknowledgement. The world had seemed so simple then, a clear line between good and evil, victim and perpetrator. But the lines had blurred, smudged by the corrosive power of loss and the echoes of my own past failures. I had been so focused on finding the new killer. I hadn't seen the one who was standing right beside me, haunted by the same specter. The pain in my arm was a dull throb now, a constant reminder, but it was overshadowed by the ache in my soul, the weight of understanding. The ocean, vast and unforgiving, seemed to hold its breath. This wasn't the clean resolution I'd always craved, but a messy, human one, steeped in tragedy. I had confronted my demons, and they looked startlingly like my own reflection. I pulled out my satellite phone, its signal a fragile thread against the immense expanse of water and sky.